Okay, so the next thing we need to discuss is the history of the counseling field. Now, your reading is going to cover the history for the next several weeks. I'm going to do a very short history of it, but I think it's very important for us to understand where we come from so we don't make the same mistakes. Because if I'm going to show a video to you in the next slide, and you'll see the amount of mistakes that we made just in the learning process, and it has affected the counseling credibility. And so we want to make sure that we improve our credibility. In the last few years, we've seen that improve. But again, just understanding the history. So prior to 1960, counseling was primarily provided by school professionals and universities. To have a counseling center or a private practice or managed care was just not really heard of. Usually you had asylums or sanatoriums, but prior to the 1960s, it was primarily school professionals and universities. It was mainly guidance, helping students make good choices in school, things of that nature. And then in 1963, John F. Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act. And this was financially and socially motivated. We started seeing issues. We started seeing a need for assistance. Prior to this, a person could be institutionalized for any extended period of time, and the conditions were not well. So one of the asylums that they have available, and you'll see it in this video, for touring, it's in West Virginia, and it's the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. One of the neatest things about touring that location was that they had a list of things that you could be institutionalized for. So when you go and tour this location, they actually give you a certificate of institutionalization. And so for me, mine was sunstroke. So yes, I could have been institutionalized for sunstroke. You could be institutionalized because you were a woman who was nagging your husband. Now, some of you guys might actually find that enjoyable, but that meant the kids came too. So you're talking about kids and adults in these institutions, and not necessarily needing to be in an institutional. One reason was being kicked by a horse. So again, these things do not make sense to us today, but it's understanding this is what was happening back then, and how far we've come actually. So in the institution or in counseling, we are required to provide at least the very, very minimum psychoeducation, inpatient care if needed, outpatient care if needed. There is such a thing as intensive outpatient. Any ER-based services, that may be, if you work at a hospital and partnering with the ER department. And then partial hospitalization if needed. So let's go ahead and we will get started on the next slide, which is the video that will give you a lot of background.
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today, we're looking at the top 10 horrifying mental asylums.
Number 10, Topeka State Hospital. Where? Topeka, Kansas. Years of operation from 1872 to 1997. It's hard to come to grips with the medical justification for castration, but somehow the practitioners at Topeka State Hospital found the practice suitable. After Kansas law saw it fit to administer castrations for habitual criminals, idiots, epileptics, imbeciles, and the insane in 1931, Topeka State Hospital went on to perform 54 castrations. If castrations were not enough to frighten you, accounts detail stories of a patient who had been strapped down so long that his skin began to grow over the straps. In addition, patients were victims of rape and other forms of abuse. What makes the abuse of patients at this hospital so disconcerting is that it was later revealed that many of the identities and illnesses of the patients were unknown, with the hospital lacking any proper paperwork for them to be committed. Somehow, the Topeka State Hospital remains open until 1997. Number 9, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Where? Louisville, Kentucky. Years of operation, 1910 to 1961. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium is another case that demonstrates man's willingness to experiment on his fellow man with little regard or concern for his well-being. While not exactly deemed a mental asylum, the Kentucky hospital housed tuberculosis patients during an era of medical uncertainty on the subject. Without a prevailing paradigm for medical treatment of tuberculosis, doctors resorted to barbaric methods. Cases of doctors removing ribs and muscles and even having inserted balloons into the lungs to help them expand more are well documented. The death rate at Waverly Hills Sanatorium has come under fire, with independent researchers and medical personnel at the sanatorium claiming different figures. According to Assistant Medical Director Dr. J. Frank W. Stewart, the highest number of deaths in a single year at Waverly Hills was 152. Independent researchers have argued that the number is closer to 162 and have extrapolated that over the 50 years Waverly Hills Sanatorium was open, approximately 8,212 people died in their care. Number 8. Overbrook Insane Asylum. Where? Cedar Grove, New Jersey. Years of operation, 1896 to 1975. Operations began in 1896, with Essex County officials designating 325 acres of land as the new location of the county asylum for the mentally ill. Specifically chosen for its scenic view, officials believed its remote location and high-altitude location would provide a healthy, peaceful setting for patients to rehabilitate in. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Soon after opening, the patient-to-staff ratio became unbalanced, leaving too many patients in need of care that they weren't getting from the overworked staff. The results were frightening. Conditions were so bad that 24 patients froze to death in their own beds in the early 20th century, while more than 150 patients went missing and were never found. Despite all of this, Overbrook remained open for nearly a century, eventually closing in the 1970s. Number 7. Willowbrook State School. Where? Staten Island, New York. Years of operation, 1947 to 1987. One of the most important cases on our list is the Willowbrook State School, a state-sponsored institution for children who were intellectually disabled that became the catalyst for reform of mental health institutions. Things were so bad at Willowbrook that during the 1960s, Robert Kennedy referred to it as zoo-like and a snake pit. Initially designed for 4,000 children, by 1965, Willowbrook contained a population of 6,000 people. First-hand accounts claimed that patients were left to wander around the facility covered in their own urine and feces. However, what's more troubling is the experiments that the doctors carried out on the very children they were supposed to care for. Struggling to find answers about the outbreak of hepatitis, medical researcher Saul Krugman used the children of Willowbrook to answer those questions. One of his studies involved feeding the live hepatitis virus to 60 healthy children, according to researcher and author Paul Offit. Krugman watched as their skin and eyes turned yellow and their livers got bigger. He watched them vomit and refuse to eat. All the children fed hepatitis virus became ill, some severely. Krugman reasoned that it was justifiable to inoculate retarded children at Willowbrook with hepatitis virus because most of them would get hepatitis anyway. But by purposefully giving the children hepatitis, Krugman increased that chance to 100%. The great horrors of Willowbrook led to the passage of a federal law, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act of 1980. Number 6. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Where? Weston, West Virginia. Years of operation, 1864 to 1994. An amalgamation of many of our other cases, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum had it all. Built to house only 250 patients, by 1949 the hospital had over 2,400 people in its care. A 1938 report by a survey committee organized by a group of North American medical organizations found that the hospital housed epileptics, alcoholics, drug addicts, and non-educable mental defectives among its population. Those they were not able to control were locked in cages, with others even being lobotomized with rudimentary instruments such as ice picks. All in all, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum's horrible treatment of patients undoubtedly contributed to the tens of thousands of lives the asylum claimed during its surprisingly long years of operation. Number 5. Byberry Mental Hospital. Where? Byberry, Pennsylvania. Years of operation, 1907 to 1987. Civil disobedience seems to have gotten a bad reputation in our current political climate, but it's certainly effective. When Charlie Lord, a conscientious objector, was assigned to duty at the hospital, he took 36 black and white photographs, which was enough for them to shut down Byberry Mental Hospital. The photos led to mass outrage, with even First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt pledging her support to combat the issue. Other reformers compared the conditions to Nazi concentration camps and described the overcrowded conditions where patients were sleeping in their own feces and urine. Multiple first-hand accounts describe the overwhelming filth of the facility and the patient's ability to roam the facility naked. Lord's images of the inhumane conditions were published in a 1946 issue of Life magazine and sparked widespread reforms of mental health facilities. With public pressure growing, the facility was forced to downsize and eventually close its doors. Number 4, Bloomingdale Insane Asylum. Where? Morningside Heights, New York City. Years of operation, 1821 to 1880. Established in 1821, the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum was formed with the intention of morally rehabilitating mentally ill patients. However, the hospital's practices strayed greatly from its moral principles. Journalist Julius Chambers managed to expose its revolting practices in 1872 by taking extraordinary measures. With the help of a senior editor of the New York Tribune, Chambers managed to have himself committed to the asylum for 10 days. After exiting the institution, he published a story detailing the inhuman practices at the asylum, including patients who were kicked and choked until they bled, and in some cases driven to suicide by systematic cruelties. As a result of his muckraking, the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum was forced to release 12 patients at the facility who were not mentally ill. In addition, Chambers' subsequent book, A Mad World and Its People, led to reform for the rights of the mentally ill. Number 3, Pilgrim Psychiatric Center. Where? Brentwood, New York. Years of operation, 1941 to present. In the case of Pilgrim Psychiatric Center, the gross misconduct of a single patient is more telling than the rampant abuse of its populace. In the 1940s, Beluga Jones was taken to Pilgrim Psychiatric Center, at the time the largest hospital/asylum in the world. Beluga was admitted by her husband after a pregnancy with her last child resulted in psychosis. Family members state that her husband consented to the leucotomy only because doctors said it would work and was the only alternative. There, Beluga Jones had 15 rounds of electroshock over 10 weeks, despite her delusions continuing. Later, a lobotomy was performed where doctors drilled holes into her brain and swiped at the frontal lobes. Beluga Jones's story led Christine Johnson, her granddaughter, to pore over her file and demand answers on the use of the medical practices and why a Nobel Peace Prize would be awarded to a man that legitimized lobotomy and made it into a public practice. After spending decades in the facility, in 1972, Beluga Jones was released. Somehow, Pilgrim Psychiatric Center is still open today. Number 2, Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital. Where? Morris Plains, New Jersey. Years of operation, 1876 to present. Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital does not differ greatly from many of the other wards on this list. It was guilty of overpopulation, squeezing 2,412 patients in a space meant to hold no more than 1,600. Additionally, Greystone administered insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy on veterans suffering from PTSD. However, what makes Greystone unique is that it housed one of the legends of folk music, Woody Guthrie. Guthrie had a stint at Greystone from 1956 to 1961. He was suffering from Huntington's disease, a hereditary, degenerative nervous disorder, which would eventually prove terminal. During his stay there, Woody referred to Greystone as Gravestone. Guthrie wrote hundreds of letters from Wardy 40, the nickname of his hospital wing, which just goes to show the patients who are diagnosed with mental illness still need the human contact and interaction that we all do. Number 1, Pennhurst Insane Asylum. Where? Spring City, Pennsylvania. Years of operation, 1908 to 1907. While abuse to any patient is reprehensible, Pennhurst Insane Asylum's treatment of children puts it in a league of its own. Built to educate and care for the mentally disabled, Pennhurst soon came to be identified for just the opposite. As a result of investigative reporter Bill Baldini in 1968, the public learned of the horrible conditions in the asylum. The news report, titled "Suffer the Little Children," showed neglected children's screams filling the air, large-scale physical and sexual abuse, and a general lack of empathy towards patients. The report also revealed that children who bit one another got a warning, with a second warning leading to a child's teeth being pulled out. After a second report by former resident Terry Lee Haldeman, the courts found that over 3,000 of the institution's patients were not receiving adequate care, and the institution was closed.
So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do.
Journalist Julius
So thank you for watching that. I know that's not an easy video to watch, but these are the worst of the worst situations. So what we're going to switch over is some more of the history coming out of the 1900s to 1950s and all the turmoil that occurred during that time. Okay, so as we continue the history of the counseling field, in 1970s, the focus was on college counseling graduates that are into disciplinary and holistic approaches. Okay, so it's promoting healthy lifestyles, IDing stressors, levels of functioning, and restoration of mental health. You can see that a lot of those same concepts we still utilize today. AMHCA emerged in 1977 and hosted its first conference. And I would highly recommend some of these groups that I'm mentioning, making a point to research and look into if you would like to join, because they are great for educational material, connection through conferences, as well as just the basic ethical standards that we live by and we work by. Maybe live by is not the best word, but work by.